Writing is a medium of human communication that represents language and emotion with signs and symbols. In most languages, writing is a complement to speech or spoken language. Writing is not a language, but a tool used to make languages be read. Within a language system, writing relies on many of the same structures as speech, such as vocabulary, grammar, and semantics, with the added dependency of a system of signs or symbols. The result of writing is called text, and the recipient of text is called a reader. Motivations for writing include publication, storytelling, correspondence, record keeping, and diary. Writing has been instrumental in keeping history, maintaining culture, dissemination of knowledge through the media, and the formation of legal systems. From Wikipedia, the free encyclopedia.
History of pen and ink. History of pen starts in ancient Egypt, where scribes, trying to find replacement for styluses and writing in clay, invented reed pens. These pens were made from a single reed straw that is pointed at one end and with a slit that led the ink to the point and left the mark on the papyrus. This pen was too rigid and its point didn't last long. Because of that, people started using quills, pens made from molted flight feathers of large birds. These pens were also made by making a point at thicker end, but feathers were cured before the use and could maintain the point longer. They were popular in the Western world from the 6th to the 19th century until steel pens appeared. Metal nibs for dip pens were used in ancient Rome but were not popular until they were mass-produced in 19th century. Pens with reservoirs were known since 10th century but were not widely used. In 17th century, inventor Daniel Schroeder made a pen made from two quills that held the ink inside instead of being dipped into inkwell. The first fountain pens appeared in 19th century in France and revolutionized writing because they made much less mess and didn't have to be dipped in inkwell all the time. End of the 19th century saw also the first ballpoint pen, which was, when modernized, even more practical and cheaper than fountain pen. The first fiber or felt-tipped pen was invented in Japan in 1960s, and it later developed into marker pen and highlighter, which work on the similar principle. After that, in the 1970s, was invented roller ball pen, which is similar to ballpoint pen but uses water-based inks while ballpoint uses oil-based.
Ink is as old as pen and maybe even older. Chinese knew about ink in 23rd century BC. They made plant, animal, and mineral inks and used it for painting on silk and paper. The best ink they used was made from pine sap made from trees that were between 50 and 100 years old. They also made ink from mixture of hide glue, carbon black, lamp black, and bone black pigment, which was mixed with pestle and mortar. In India, ink was made since 4th century BC. This ink called masi was made from burnt bones, tar, and pitch. Greeks and Romans made ink from soot, glue and water, so-called carbon inks. They don't damage the paper they were used on but are not resistant to moist and can smudge. Iron gall ink was popular from 5th century to the 19th century and was made from iron salts and tannic acids. Only problem with this ink was that it is corrosive and damages the paper it is on. In 12th century Europe, ink was also made from branches of hawthorn which were cut in the spring and left to dry. Then the bark from the branches would be peeled off and left to soak in water for 8 days. That water would be boiled until it is thick and black, but while boiling, wine would be added to it. That thick and black liquid would be poured in bags and left on sun to dry. When it is dried, wine, again, and iron salt would be mixed with it over fire. Resulting mixture would be ink ready to use. Together, pen and ink changed the face of the humanity and are regarded because of that as one of the greatest inventions.
Pen and Ink, poem by David Lewis Paget.
If all the world were pen and ink and all the folk were sorrow, if all the trees were burly breeze and Wednesdays come tomorrow, if all the stars were out of sight and snow fell softly overnight, if all we woke to morning white who'd lantern light the morrow, If all the earth were beaten gold and all the fields were fallow, if all the bees were tried to please and all the mud marshmallow, if all the children walked away to never change from day to day but gambled in the autumn hay, who'd taper light the tallow?
Paper, Pen, and Ink, poem by Orlando Bello.
With paper, pen and ink I began to think of a story that I could write. Or maybe a verse or two about something new, something original, fresh and bright. I sat and thought, but thought of naught, a big zero full of nothing. A mist came down and I could hear a sound that sounded like water lapping. It was a castle's moat and a waiting boat, and a figure with a hooded habit. He took no breath and looked like death, this man so old and decrepit. A woman in white stepped into sight carrying her head beneath her arm. On the boat she sat beside a brown rat, which disturbed the water's calm. The boat drifted from sight into the night like a thought from a weary mind. The thinning grey mist was instantly mist, leaving my paper, pen, and ink behind.